Hi, friends, and welcome to a new episode of It's Really a Podcast. This week, we're going to talk about something that I feel like is an always interesting topic, and that's the idea of movie adaptations or any adaptations of classic literature. So get ready with a bowl of popcorn or a cozy book or a blanket for any of those things. And get ready for this week's episode of It's Really a Podcast. Over the last few months, there's been quite a discussion about a new adaptation of Emily Bronte's Gothic classic, Wuthering Heights. The version in question is written and directed by Emerald Fennell, the filmmaker behind Oscar favorite Promising Young Woman and cult-loved Saltburn. In all of her projects, Fennell has proven to be a filmmaker fueled by bold choices rather than creating accessible media, and her Wuthering Heights might push the cultural buttons more than any other. But that led me to want to discuss what exactly makes a good adaptation of classic literature when brought to the big screen. Does it have to be exactly like the book to be beloved? Or are bold adaptations more interesting? It's a complex topic that, as you're about to hear, I got to dive deep into with my podcast buddy, Dwight Hurst of The Broken Brain, and also my co-host on Fan with an E, our Anne with an E / Anne of Green Gables podcast. So without further ado, enjoy this wild, lengthy episode about classic literature and how it's brought to the big screen.
It was Kathy's choice.
Why did you betray your own heart?
And Heathcliff's curse.
Drive me mad. Only do not leave me.
It was a passion.
My great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries.
An obsession.
It's a diabolical man. He will stop at nothing.
A love that destroyed everyone it touched.
Don't you know I'll always come back?
Always.
Now, for the first time, Emily Bronte's full story is told. Wuthering Heights.
Hi, friends, and welcome to another fun little conversation in this episode of It's Really a Podcast. And I'm super excited to have my friend and guest who I just so happen to co-host a Anne with an E podcast with. It's Dwight.
Hi. Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm so
How are you
excited
doing
to come
today?
back. Oh, I'm doing good. Especially, I've got all these thoughts buzzing around literature adaptations, which has been fun to revisit these old movies and thoughts in my head when you asked me to be on here. So it's been especially good.
Yeah, I just thought that you were the best guest to ever have on here because we literally host a podcast that's about an adaptation of classic literature. So
That's right.
Who not to bring it on than my pal Dwight. So Dwight, do you want to tell people about our podcast a little bit to get them started?
Oh, sure. About the Anne with an E.
Yeah.
We do. Well, yeah, we do we call it Fan with an E. Generally speaking, when we go on, it's about the Netflix series Anne with an E, which is one of the modern adaptations of Anne of Green Gables from Lucy Maud Montgomery's book. Many people think, and that's where I love the idea of getting into this adaptation stuff of where people throw this out and sometimes use it in film discussions and sometimes arguments or whatever. But I think it's really worth remembering that when we watch a film, like the Anne with Green Gables is a great example of it because it is a adaptation, obviously, of the book. And when we watch Anne with an E, it is another separate adaptation of a book. Sometimes I think when we fall in love with a film adaptation, we forget that it came from a piece of art that is a piece of art in its own right? And so that's really fun when we look at it. It's not a remake of the miniseries. It's another take on the book, right? But it uses a lot of information that they just wouldn't have thought about when they did storytelling back when the miniseries was made. So it makes it its own fresh kind of story because they showcase some things that I'd say like neurodivergence plays a role there, even though they don't necessarily call it out. Obviously,
Hmm.
trauma and some of the impact of trauma that's had. In fact, Anne with an E, I think, is one of the best examples of modern TV shows. I think this is saying a lot because they're very good at using trauma in storytelling nowadays, and I think it's one of the best examples because you can just see how the traumatic ripples of things that have happened to people in Evan Lee versus also in Anne's life. And so anyway, yeah, we get all into all the different motivations of the different characters, and one of those benefits of having something having been around so long is that you get people working on it who are in love with the original book, who are in love with the original miniseries, and then they get to vent their creativity onto like, oh, this character. What do you want to do with? Hey, should we give Gilbert a little more to do? Yeah, why don't we do that? Whatever it is.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that also the thing that we love about this show too is how it mixes sort of like modern sensibilities into a
Mhm.
story that feels so inherently of the past, yet
Yes.
continues to be relevant for like all
Hmm.
those reasons you listed. And also, how it talks about gender roles within like women and men, and also, again, neurodivergence and
And
also
queer
like just
issues.
yes, queer
Yeah.
issues as
What
well.
would it have been like to be a gay kid in Avonlea? Well, I mean, they got a couple episodes there to explore.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, those are some of our favorites. So we love talking
Yes.
about that
Yeah.
too. Yeah. So, and also like immigration, because that's a thing that later on
Absolutely.
the show talks
Racism.
about too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's always fascinating which things seem to stay around, right? And I think that there
Hmm.
are timeless elements. In fact, I was looking up before we recorded, which is what is the definition of classic literature? Because I want to include this one where the original work was from the late '60s, and it was interesting because you gave me a much more useful definition than like when
Hmm.
I Googled it and looked it up. It was just basically the one that I found online was something like it should be timeless. It's just something with timeless elements that, is timeless. And it's like, okay, great. So yours was at least 20 plus years old, or else how could
Yeah.
it have nostalgia around it? I felt that to be a very more practically useful definition.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, because I feel like we as a culture need to be separated from the era that the piece of work was written so that we can have the ability to reflect from a certain our own time period on that piece of literature. And also like how can you define something as classic if it hasn't existed, in the zeitgeist for a
For
certain
at
amount
least
of
like a
decades?
generation or something, right? Or
Right,
yeah, yeah.
right. Exactly.
if the
Exactly.
if the people who were young adults when it came out would look around and recognize the world today without much being different, then it probably isn't quite. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yes.
Right. In terms of adaptations, as I told you about before, and for those of you listening to the podcast, I kind of already went into an entire little rant about this. But the whole reason why I wanted to make this episode and have this conversation with you is about the current, soon to come out adaptation of Wuthering Heights, which is by the iconic Emily Bronte of the Bronte sisters. And the movie is being directed and written by one Emerald Fennell, who many people will know for creating the Oscar nominated Promising Young Woman. And, also creating a multitude of other movies that have either been extremely controversial or beloved in certain circles. And this one might perhaps be her most controversial yet to many people. So I'm curious to know, Dwight, I know that you don't have like a lot of stake in the Wuthering Heights specific conversation so much, but what are your thoughts about
Yeah.
adaptations? Are you like a fan of it sticking like to the exactness of the book, or do you like ones that take a big swing? Because I'm on the team of I like a little bit of both, but mostly
Hmm.
the ones that take a big swing and do something
Yeah,
different.
yeah. No, I'll tell you, I think there's room for both out there. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, I think that when you put something onto the screen, if it's from a larger, longer, like a book, obviously, if you're adapting from something, I think very rarely is it going to address everything that everyone liked about the book, right? Because
Hmm.
a book is long and a movie is not as long, right? And yet you can do, and I know they're doing this with the whole, whole another podcast worth of spinning off in this, but like right now you see with the Harry Potter thing. I mean,
Hmm.
you and I were talking about this before we recorded. There's a lot to
Yeah.
say about that, but they're saying like, oh, great, now we're seeing this TV thing, and we're going to be able to see all the parts of the books that we didn't want to see, that we didn't see, I should say, before, that we wanted to see, or whatever. I'm not, I don't know all of that as much because I didn't really read the Harry Potter books, so.
Mm.
But so I hear people say that, and then you see, and there's a lot of these longer form kind of multiple, but it's one of those things where you're like, wow, that means we already know that we're coming in with
Hmm.
10 years plus of material that we could put on screen. And we already have a good reason to think that people are going to allow us to go for 10 years minimum. So if you
Yeah.
have a property that is that energized and connected to the populace, and you know that there's enough juice, like maybe Harry Potter, and it's not a done deal that it will for sure. I mean, we don't know
Right.
that for sure. There's a lot of stuff up in the air about that that could easily flip. We all know there's
Hmm.
lots of controversy related to. So it's pretty bold to say we're going to go 10 years. I think you can see this with the television series, the Apple series, Silo, where they've been
Hmm.
putting about, I think that they've done 3 seasons. It's like been 2 books or something like that. And anyway, so getting into that, I think going back to the idea of an adaptation that is a film, I think first of all, you have to go in knowing that it's going to be different. And there is something to be said for a one, because if you have a one, used to be 3 max, like trilogies were when I was growing up, that was, you didn't get more than a trilogy of anything, right? And then now we've got multiple movies and things. But if you were like, okay, it's going to be 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, it's gonna have to, a lot of two's gonna have to make a lot of money. So if it wasn't a sure thing, there's something about the boundary of having a hour and a half to 3 hour long at the most story to fit this whole book into. So it's going to be different. And some people would argue, and I think there's a case to be made, even though I enjoy some of the long form stuff, that the restrictive nature of it makes for a better movie.
Yes.
Because if this can't be much longer than 2 hours, because ain't nobody going to watch that, you better hit the high points. You better just do the best you can with whatever you can
Hmm.
fit in. And then you go with the whole kill your darlings kind of philosophy of like, yeah, we're going to make a better story even if we get rid of that scene. So I think going, so a long-winded way of saying, I think that there's a lot of things people get excited to see on screen about their favorite book or whatever. Um, and then I'll say, in addition to that, also though, when somebody does something that has been done before, especially if it's been done a lot before, I really enjoy when they do something that's a little bit of a different take as
Hmm.
well, right? When they purposefully say, we're going to do something, and we're going to put in some stuff that maybe they wouldn't have thought to put in before, and we're going to put in some stuff that we're not even going to apologize for. It just isn't in the original work that we're doing it off of, but we wanted to see what would have happened if this was, and be a little experimental about it, you know? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I
taking big swings, I think personally is so much more interesting, especially when it's a piece of work that's existed for hundreds of years at this point, you know? Um,
Absolutely.
like the one that I think about the most, that I think is probably the most famous for how much like cinematically it's changed over our time, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
He lived a solitary life behind stone walls.
Hey, Quasi, what's going on out there? A fight? A flogging?
The Festival of Fools.
All right, all right. Wine, women, and song.
Outside was a world he only dreamed about.
I'd never fit in out there.
Until he met Esmeralda.
Come with me.
You're right. I'll go. Way to go, lover boy.
From Walt Disney Pictures comes an incredible film about one extraordinary human being discovering the magic within himself. The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Because while obviously the Victor Hugo classic is something that's, very beloved to a generation of people, I think because of especially, the adaptations, like obviously the Disney one, and even before that, the Charles Laughton one from the 1930s, is so much more of a concise story than a story that then is sprinkled with Victor Hugo ranting and raving about, architecture, the gravel, the slate, of the church, that kind of a thing.
I remember my brother went through a phase where he was reading Les Miserables, and we were both pretty into the music and the musical when we were growing up, and we'd talk about it a lot. And I never really tried to bite off that, reading the actual book. But so he may have read it a couple times, even, I'm not sure, or different sections of it at different times and things. And so, but I just remember one time he was telling me about reading the first bit, and he's reading and reading and reading, and finally he's like, what is that? Where is this going? And he realizes this is all about the guy who he steals the candlesticks from. That's all this whole however many pages. It's like this guy who we don't need to know anything about him other than, like, so when they made the musical, they're like, he's a priest, he's kind, bam. And we didn't even say he was kind, we just showed you, because he just didn't arrest him for that. That's all we needed, by the way, Victor.
And that's what I mean, is that, like, even though there are, obviously pieces of classic literature that are classic for a reason, I feel like a lot of the time those classic stories are classic because of the way they've been adapted for our modern sensibilities to take in, right? And Les Mis is honestly a great example, because I feel like predominantly people know about Les Mis because of the musical, and the musical definitely does not have, like, let's spend an hour singing about, like, the cobblestone streets of France that are getting blood spurred all over like that kind of thing.
Remember the guy who cleaned it?
Yeah.
No, that's a great point, because you think about, where do people know classics from? They usually know them from one of two areas. One is which is your education. And Les Miserables, for example, is way too long for any college, or maybe a college course but they're not going to have time to read it all in a semester, right? Especially in like a high school or something. Or it's fun to consume. Now, and I don't want to. I didn't read Les Miserables, but from my brothers, there are things that are good. But I think about, like, Moby Dick. For me, effort, right? Not just like, yeah, this is awesome. So what would be the consumption of Les Miserables by the general population if it wasn't?
Yeah, and one of the most beloved musicals of all time. Arguably, the musical has surpassed the book. I
don't even think it's an argument.
But that's also the same thing with Hunchback, is that I feel like people have no knowledge of some of those characters that are in the Hunchback story that I've never been adapted, and if they are, they're in, again, versions from like the 1930s and prior.
Well, I haven't even seen the Charles Lawton movie, so there's I did see the stage musical, but yeah.
Oh, cool! That's awesome. The Disney. Editor Day-lin here. So in this conversation, me and Dwight were talking about Hunchback of Notre Dame musical adaptations, and I actually messed up the names and everything. So what I was trying to talk about, which will segue into our next little bit of the conversation, is that there were multiple Hunchback of Notre Dame musical adaptations over time, and one of them was a very questionable one made in French Canadian territory area of the world that is kind of notoriously bad. So that's what I was talking about, and then we will segue into this next part of the podcast. But if you haven't checked out the Broadway quote unquote version of the Disney musical that was done in New Jersey and in LA almost 10 years ago, highly recommend checking that out. But let's get back to the conversation. Editor Day-lin out.
I'm not sure. So this is like a Phantom of the Opera and a Phantom, right? Because that's the two musicals, the two plays, Phantom of the Opera and Phantom, both based off of the original book. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a Andrew Lloyd Webber versus Jestin Copen situation.
Boy, that'd be a fist fight that I'd love to see. No.
I
don't really know anything. I don't have any idea what either of them look like, other than Andrew Lloyd Webber's old.
Yeah, well, they spoiler alert.
I'm sure they're probably both old, right?
Yeah.
Are they alive? I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think they are.
Isn't he, or is he dead?
Oh, Andrew Lloyd Webber's still alive.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Homeboy's still kicking. Homeboy is
Oh,
about to
that's
make
right.
an
Yeah.
a Fan of the Opera anime. So get ready for that
Really?
podcast. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's nice. I have a lot of feelings on Phantom that I won't go into now. So yeah.
Oh, wait. I want to hear your thoughts about I mean, we're talking about adaptations.
Well,
Talk
I
about it.
will say I got to see it on Broadway a long ago, and it was
Mm-hmm.
really cool. But I remember I listened to the book as an audio book back when you had to get it from. It
Oh.
might have even been on tape. I don't even know if it was on CD, but I just remember listening to it, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in the book all
Mm-hmm.
about the background of the Phantom,
The
and that is
Persian.
yes, that he's like, yeah, he's
Yeah.
from because there's the detective from who's been
Mm-hmm.
following him, and it was his name, Eric, I think. Is that the Phantom's real
Is
name? I
that the
can't remember.
Phantom's name?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
Phantom's name. And then you have this detective who's been following, and he hooks up with dude man, protagonist man. I can't remember the dude's name. What's the main guy's name?
Oh, Raoul?
Yeah, there's Christine, and Raoul's in love with Christine. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All I remember of him is him saying, "Christine, bravo," which is all he says in the musical. But so, so this guy shows up in the book and he's like, I know this guy. He's whack. You got to be careful. I'm here, but he's like a friend of mine, but I'm also trying to stop him. And he's got this like Punjab lasso skills. He can like lasso you and hang you at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him do it many times. There's this allusion to like him in traveling around, I think like African places, or he has some kind of weird
Yeah.
gun that shoots fire. And there's all that stuff that I'm like didn't make it into what I'm like. This is way more interesting than just Christine and Rel grew up together or whatever. It's very compelling. And the one thing I will say, yeah. So I like that's why the I think it's Phantom means it was much more about the Phantom, which is more. It was just also interesting, right? But I would love to see personally an adaptation that actually whereas they kind of touch on, if you know that that's there, you can see some
Mm-hmm.
stuff in the musical where you're like, oh, they kind of reference that. Or some guy hopped on stage and said, hey, keep your hand at the level of your eye. And I guess that's the detective guy. He's not even like a named character,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and that's why there are some Fan of the Opera movie adaptations that do have like a few of those things, but like the Persian, they almost always nix him because he's just
I
apparently
think
not important.
that character would be the most interesting character
Right?
in an adaptation in my mind to be like, yes, I'm this guy who's obsessively pursued this sort of like disfigured murderer who is also my friend who but I also need to stop, and who I hear these stories, I know that's him, and I'm here, and it's like he should be the protagonist of the movie.
Yeah. Hello,
So
Dev Patel. Like, let's get on
yes,
that. Like,
yes, oh my god, you just cast it right there.
yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
the Persian could be the name of this movie.
Yeah.
The Persian and the
I love
Phantom.
that. I love
Oh,
that.
we should
PP.
delete this so we can like start writing this script.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. I mean, and listen, as a diehard fan with a PH, I have a lot of thoughts about all of the adaptations. And see, that's why this episode's great because we can talk about all these things. Because like, so my favorite, and this is actually what I was going to talk about too. My favorite Fan of the Opera adaptations are the ones that um I like the musical from a nostalgic point of view. It was the second or third musical I ever saw when I was little. Um and I also saw it on Broadway.
And it's great, by the way, the music and everything
Yes.
classic. I know. I don't have any beef with it that way. I'm just
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, no. And but when you've gotten a glimmer of the other interesting ways to tell the story, that's
Right?
how I feel. So
Yeah.
my like favorite movie of all time is technically a Phantom of the Opera adaptation. That's Phantom of the Paradise by Brian De Palma.
20th Century Fox presents Phantom of the Paradise, a gothic horror story.
What was that?
A beautiful love story.
Like a circus.
A cinematic odyssey through the rock universe.
And that is an adaptation of Phantom of the Opera, but as a 70s rock musical with
What?
yes, with the story of Faust mixed in, which if you know Phantom of the Opera, Faust is the opera that they do in Phantom of the
Uh-huh.
Opera. Like not the one that he writes, obviously, but it is the one that like Christine does in certain
Mhm.
versions before the fan, like
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of a thing. So I love that version because not only is it a huge swing because it's a 70s rock musical, but it also takes the aspects of the Phantom story of like him being a musician who's disfigured and gets like the rug pulled out from under him and all that kind of stuff in a way that I think is really interesting about how it talks about like 70s music culture and just also like the thing that the decision we have to make about whether the price of fame, like do we want to be famous because it's cool, or do we want to be famous because we want to be remembered, and like what constitutes as being remembered in a good way and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna check this
But
out.
and oh, you do. We absolutely do. And especially because Paul Williams, the guy that wrote Rainbow Connection, is the villain in the movie.
Oh,
And he also wrote all the songs in the movie. It's a musical. So it is Chef's Kiss. I'm literally looking at a poster of it like right next to me.
oh,
It's
amazing.
yeah,
Okay,
so
this
good.
is yeah, going. I'm writing it down in my notes here that I have to watch that. So, okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah, my favorite movie of all time. Will always be down to talk about it. The other thing I was gonna say, just as one little quick like side note of like, talking about big swings that I love, and then I want to hear about your adaptation you're talking about, is I love and this is definitely a product of like the post Andrew Lloyd Webber world of Phantom of the Opera, the Robert England slasher movie version of Phantom of the Opera.
Some stories have so great a power that with each new generation, they are reborn.
There's a feeling, a passion.
But it had to come from somewhere. This was no phantom. Ghosts do not skin their victims. This is the work of an artist.
I knew there was like a black and white
It's a
version of it.
it's a smidge older than me. I think it came out in 89 or it could have
Oh,
been
so I
90.
maybe I didn't know. You had Robert England, Freddy Krueger was in this. Then
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
not know about this one.
Oh yeah.
You're like
And
keeping the
and
paint
my
with Phantom of the Opera. I love it.
yeah, oh listen, like I said, I could do an entire podcast just about Phantom of the Opera. It's my neurodivergent special interest. It kind of falls fun fact if you guys don't know, I love Beauty and the Beast. It's kind of my thing. And then Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback are like whoop, like off the tree, so they're also special interests.
The big
It's a
three.
whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big three. They're the big French three because they're all about ugly dudes in France.
I love this. This is great. That would be the name of the podcast, by the way. The
The
podcast
ugly
it's
dudes
about that
in
would be called
France.
Ugly Dudes in France.
That honestly, I'm gonna keep that in mind. That's a great idea. But
TM.
yeah, TM exactly. Um, but no, the thing is that like I love that adaptation because it is batshit insane. Okay, because not only is it a slasher movie, but it's also a time travel movie because it starts in New York City in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And we meet our Christine, who's played by my iconic favorite scream queen, Jill Shulin, who some people will know from Popcorn. I think that was like her most famous horror movie. Um, and so basically, she goes on in an audition, funny enough, at the theater where they were playing at the time Les Mis, which is really funny. Yeah. Because there's like Mis posters all over
Oh no.
outside.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so they do this audition for some random show. And as she's doing the audition, crazy time travel stuff happens and she gets hit with a sandbag and then breaks the glass. And then she is Christine England? They don't do it in France for some reason. It's in England this time. I guess because they didn't want to pay for French actors. And
But this is like a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court type of thing where she gets hit over the head, and instead of getting modern science tells us that if an item like a coconut or something hits you on the head, you lose your memory. You don't go back.
Yeah. No, logic. Total logic. So yeah, she gets sent back in time, and then basically you find out through crazy circumstance that Eric is sort of kind of like an immortal demonic being who like follows her throughout time, and it's great. So
that's wild. Okay, this is like my list of movies to watch is getting longer.
Again, I like adaptations that take big swings and do weird stuff because they're so memorable, and I love it. So enough of my rambling. Tell me about your adaptation. You love.
I mean, there's a couple of them that hit me about how they take on a life of their own. I didn't write down. I should have mentioned. Speaking of changing settings for a big swing, was Clueless. That's probably maybe the even best known example.
So, okay, like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America, but some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? And it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? People came that like did not RSVP. So I was like totally like.
In fact, there's so many people who might or might not even realize that it's from I'll say it wrong, Emma, right? But anyway, but that's another example of one that has become, to an entire generation. And this is the kind of movie that each generation I find it keeps rediscovering because they'll show it to their kids, right? And so, oh, this is something I watched that was really important or whatever at the time, and it's like, and that's that is not a rigorous following of so anyway. But yeah, speaking of taking a big swing, that whole thing was as well. So but in the vein of something that takes on a life of its own, I couldn't help but think about Frankenstein.
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called Mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men.
And Mary Shelley's book, and there's some facts about it I didn't know about, actually. It came out in 1818, and then it was re-released again in 1831. It was originally called The Modern Prometheus, I think, or that was under some printings. And then, which doesn't... I actually don't know why it was called that, because I don't know why. But there were apparently there was a different version. The 1831 re-release had some changes to the narrative. I don't know what they all were because I haven't read that, because I only found out about that this morning. But the 1831 expanded the beginning. They did some grammatical corrections, but one of the things is that the original version, Victor Frankenstein had more autonomy, is what it says here. I don't know how that was acted out. But then, of course, if you've read Frankenstein, you know that he's just kind of a myopic, tragic figure who just kind of like stumbles around the story being obnoxious.
He's very sad boy.
Yes, he's very much like, oh, and then I was taken to my bed for 14 months. And it's like, okay, great, man. That's great. You created this problem. Anyway. But so
don't you feel sad for me? Me and my scientific creation.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a rich college student who made a monster. So no, great though. I obviously the impact that it's had and the impact it had on all sci-fi and horror and everything going forward, the fact that she wrote it so quickly, that this was not something that she was expected to be able to come up with at that time. But it got me thinking around, though, the first, 1931, I believe, is the first film adaptation, the old black and white. And the thing that's so amazing to me is that when we think of the Frankenstein monster, right, what does it look like? The thing that comes to our mind, right? Generally speaking, it looks like the one. And there's been other movies, there's been other depictions that change up the way that the monster looks here and there. But they all are almost referential back to this first, and even the ones that are different, we don't remember. They're back to this first kind of thing where it's this, and even though it was in black and white, he's always got green skin too. That somehow transcended too. So he's this greenish monster with bolts in his neck. I'll keep going. The lightning bringing the body The concept of an abnormal brain accidentally being put into the body that was a criminal maniac, all of that is not in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is in the movie and has become our viewpoint into the Frankenstein story, right? Is it and I would be hard pressed to say, when we're seeing there's another one in production right now, isn't there? Someone's making a
Well, there
Frankenstein right now.
it's coming out this year.
Is it? Okay.
Our my number one boy, Guillermo del Toro,
That's
is going to have
right.
his version with Jacob Elordi and Oscar Isaac as our
I will be. Oh, I
characters.
forgot that Oscar Isaac's in that. Oh,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I will be fascinated to see if they don't lean upon some of the old imagery from the old movies. I bet they will, but I don't know. He's a clever guy, creative guy. Are they going? There is a tendency to go back to the source material sometimes, this and that. But if they don't include some of the classic imagery, I would be interested to see how many people are turned off by that. That it's like he's not doing
So,
it right or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, from my understanding, it's going to be more along the lines of the Kenneth Branagh version, which by the way is my favorite version of Frankenstein, because like love that 90s intensity.
Who's the
And
monster in that one? That one
Robert
is
De
that Robert De Niro?
Niro.
That's the Robert De Niro
Yeah.
one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
At the time, I remember people talking about throwing up during it. It was so grotesque or something like that.
It is very visceral.
Yeah,
That is the
yeah.
word I would use because there's a lot of like body fluid kind
Mhm.
of stuff. Like he basically makes like a giant womb, like in in
Okay.
air that the creature like gets created in the electricity and there's eels and he collects like um uh this is another word that's hard for me to pronounce. Basically like women's pregnant body fluid from
Okay.
women who gave birth and he
Hmm.
collects it to like
Amniotic fluid.
gestate the
Yeah.
creature in and yeah that version is chaos but it has Tom Hulse in it who's one of my favorite soft boys that I love so
I
yeah
remember, yeah, and people being upset that he didn't look like. But I do remember people saying that about De Niro because De Niro isn't made into the classic green, square-headed
no
Herman
mm-mm.
Munster kind
He
of
looks
appearance.
much more in my mind he looks much more like the classic illustrations of the creature um because he has like more of like a muscular structure
Mm-hmm.
and he talks which that's like a whole other thing like that he's actually articulate
Well, if you
you
read,
know
because in the book, it's interesting, the book towards the end, and well, sprinkled throughout, there's a couple of interactions, not
hmm
enough in my opinion, but still,
yeah
between Victor and the monster, in which the monster just talks normal
right
in the book, right? That
yeah
he learned by oh, what is it? There's a term for it now. Living in the walls of someone else's house. I was
yeah
amazed the other day. I heard someone there was a term for it. I can't remember what it was called.
yeah I don't
Terrifying
know
that there's a term for that. That makes me think it happens frequently. But he
yeah
watched this family for a long time until he was like, felt like he was a part of them because he lived in their wall or something. And that's in the book. See, and I don't necessarily, but that's not a classic thing that it's been in some of the productions, but we don't think of it when we think of it, right? So some of the
right
beats, in fact, if I read it fairly recently, um, and a couple of years ago, I reread it, and I was surprised how little there is about the process of bringing the monster to life. There's almost nothing specific. That
hmm
there's nothing at all about electricity. Electricity is always there because you're going to depict something visually. It's nice to have something that looks cool, like a big Tesla coil or something. But yeah, so there's very little that's there, and so almost everything that we accept as the classic example did not come from the source material, which I just think that's fascinating when something catches on.
yeah
And to your point with the Les Miserables thing, in a way, right? Of like, oh yeah, we all know these characters if they were featured in the musical.
oh yeah well and that's definitely the case with Frankenstein for sure because I feel like it pretty much culturally is accepted that the monster's green. He wears big platform shoes. He walks around goes "Arr!" like that kind of a
Right,
thing.
right.
And but and then of course my favorite thing is we call him Frankenstein even though the doctor is Frankenstein and that's a whole IP problem. I'm like, why didn't we come up with a name, guys? Could we
Should
call
he have a name? It's weird that he doesn't
He
ever have a
doesn't.
name, does he? Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's called Frankenstein's monster or creature.
I just call him Frankenstein Jr.
Yeah, Frankie.
Because I don't think Victor had any kids after all that. Because I
think he learned his lesson. He was like, "I'm good, thanks, guys."
I think he died too. I think was also part of it. Spoiler alert for anyone for the end of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I think he just dies of hurt feelings too. That's the other thing. The monster doesn't kill him. He just kind of like tells the story and then goes like, because he's been so sad for so long.
Well, and that's kind of the same way the Phantom dies too. He dies with a broken heart.
Right.
His heart just can't take it.
This is my take on that, by the way. I always liked to pretend when they say that the Phantom of the Opera has died or whatever. Mm-hmm. I just thought I like to pretend that he just faked it. I mean, why would he die? That didn't make sense.
For sure. Well, in the musical, it's pretty much canon that he does. That he disappears into the mirror. That's the whole thing.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right. Into the mirror. Right.
Yeah.
We know he's out there.
Your other adaptations.
Well, a couple others that stood out to me that are really interesting. One is that I was thinking about this one, I think, because I was recently on the podcast That's Bodacious Dude with our mutual friend Izzy, and we were talking about the 1985 film Return to Oz.
This summer, Walt Disney Pictures presents a motion picture fantasy adventure beyond your fondest imagination. You'll be transported miraculously back to the enchanted land of Oz, that magical kingdom beloved by young and old for generations.
It's just a yellow brick.
No, Belina, you don't understand.
Which I feel like it's a movie that most of my life no one talked about. But then when the internet came around, a lot of people that remembered it, we were all able to find each other, I think. And one of the things, I hadn't watched it for a long time. I rewatched it. I loved that. As a kid, I really did like it, but I found it very scary.
It is.
It is billed, when it came out, it was billed as a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, right? Mm-hmm. But here's a very... So the reason that I'm picking it, though, is that it's very different. It's very different from The Wizard of Oz. If we're talking about the 1939 movie that was based obviously off of the Wizard of Oz book. And so you watch it and you're like, this doesn't seem like is this a sequel? It just seems like it's kind of strange. And I remember being a kid that I really, really liked it. I liked a lot of things about it. And then as I was rewatching it this time in preparation to talk about it with Izzy, it hit me that I like watching this more than I like watching The Wizard of Oz. I enjoy this movie more. It's got more going on. It's more exciting. It's got a clockwork robot, for crying out loud, and most movies cannot claim that. And then I realized, though, that in the context of all of this, the reason that I think I gravitate so much more towards it is that I really enjoyed reading the Wizard of Oz books written by L. Frank Baum. And I looked it up. I couldn't remember... because I don't think I ever knew when I was a kid. I just knew there were tons of them, but I think there were 14 books in that series, in the series of The Wizard of Oz. And The Return to Oz is a lot more in the spirit of that. It is the books that they drew from to make it are the second and third books in that series, and then a little bit from the fourth one. So the second and third and fourth books in that series are The Marvelous Land of Oz, Ozma of Oz, and TikTok of Oz, which is where, of course, you find TikTok, the robot, the titular, in that case, clockwork robot. Now, what if he had a dance? If he had a signature dance that would go viral, that would be amazing.
You mean an app named after him?
Yeah, exactly. If he would have a signature dance on an app with a short video. Anyway, why don't we see?
Great.
Why didn't they use that imagery, by the way, of TikTok, like his head or something? That would have really taken off if they would have done. That's where we get these different characters, like Jack Pumpkinhead, the Frump, or where is he? The Gump, and all of those different characters. He also has the classic, much more like classic villain in The Wizard of Oz is the Gnome King, who they have to face in this. And the Gnome King he's all up in those books, all over the place as the main bad guy. The witch is barely, part of the first one.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah. She's kind of a speck in the greater Oz discussion.
Unless you're going the whole other adaptation, which is
The
actually an
Wicked
adaptation of an
route.
adaptation, right?
Yeah.
So that's. But so no, and I realized though that as I'm watching that, there's a lot of really strange, like the Wheeler monster, Wheelies, and the witch that like pulls her head off and replaces her head and stuff. It's terrifying.
That is one of my number one nightmare fuels. The scene when all the heads are screaming as she's like opening
Yes.
up the cabinet. Terrifying.
And you look at some of the elements of like the little key and the ring and the just
Yeah.
the little trinkets that are used to like move along in the journey and stuff, and just yeah. So I remember when that clicked for me and saying like, oh, that is a in a way sort of like aesthetically a great adaptation of the sort of spirit of all of those books, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That yeah, it draws from, and I think that's a great example of adaptation that takes elements and then makes a story based off of the elements. And then at the same time, they were also wanting to put it into a framework that those who had watched the original movie were going to go, I know what that is. That's Oz. Okay.
Mhm.
And so and Oz itself is a great example. Just the concept of the land of Oz is a great concept, is a great example of something that can be adapted and readapted and morphed and turned into this. They had a great animated show a few years ago called Return to or something. It was something else. You've got obviously Wicked. You've got Tin Man from the Sci-Fi Channel, even many series that
Yes,
came out.
Alan
Those kind of things.
Cumming.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. And I feel like Oz in general is such a fascinating IP because it's something that has been, again, part of our cultural zeitgeist for hundreds of years at this point. But at the same time, it's only been this very tiny segment of that
It's
people
very,
know.
very, yeah. It's everything
Yeah.
goes through that 1939 movie, which actually was a readaptation too, because there was an older, I believe, film that took a swing at Wizard of Oz. I can't remember
I think there
much
was
of the
a
details, but
silent
there was a,
film.
yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't the first. I just know that it's one that I see in film arguments online that people like to pull out when they're trying to trump somebody else's argument about. Oh, I don't think they should ever do remakes. Oh, the Wizard of Oz remake. That was an impression of me sounding stupid and pretentious.
Was that you as a troll?
Yes, that was it. That was my internet troll coming out. Very interesting to see how those kind of how those break out.
Mhm.
When you don't, I had the experience a couple of years ago of reading. I went back and read the 1968. Coming back to my question about how old does this stuff have to be, the 1968 novel True Grit.
Mr. Cogburn?
What do you want, girl?
I'm looking for the man who killed my father. The man's name is Tom Cheney, and I need somebody to go after him.
What's your name?
My name is Mattie Ross.
And I have a curiosity that I don't think I'm ever going to scratch the itch of, because it would mean having to watch a John Wayne movie. Sorry, anybody out there, if you're diehard fans of John Wayne was not in Die Hard, but if you're a diehard fan of John Wayne, I've never seen the John Wayne True Grit. I'd only seen the Coen brothers do an excellent movie, and now I know because I read it, an excellent adaptation actually.
Yes.
And that one would be a wonderful example of something that, if as you're reading the book, you're like, this is pretty much what they put on the screen, down to the point where some of the conversations that just seemed so Coen brothers were actually just like transcripted almost out of this novel. And so here's a novel that, in that way, when they made that in 2010, I think. So this is the good case for taking something that wasn't really well known, the book that is, and saying, we're going to make an actual story from this pretty awesome story, right? Which, by the way, centers around Maddie, the main character, who's played by Haley Stanfield, that I don't know. And like I say, this is where I'm ignorant. Maybe you've seen it, but the John Wayne True Grit, I just don't know. I can't imagine that they showcase her as much in that one because of when it was made.
Yeah, not really. I mean, she is like a prominent figure in the story, but they definitely make the movie more in the vein of like it being the John Wayne show. Now, granted, I haven't seen the movie in quite a long time. But so this is funny. I'm so glad you brought this up because I think this is a great example of how we were talking about how like one version predominantly sets like the framework for what people know of the story, and anything that's closer to the actual text, people are like, "Oh no, I don't like it." That was my dad. My dad, when we went to go see the Coen Brothers version, was like, "Oh no, this is not what I like," because I grew up with the John Wayne version, and that's all he wanted out of that story.
Huh.
And it's just interesting to me because I feel like the Coen Brothers version, like most Coen Brothers things, is really focuses on examining the flaws of the male characters that I think a lot of men, not to say you by the way, because you're an awesome person who has like a very diverse view of things.
Hey, you know what? Hashtag not all men. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like I think the John Wayne version and most John Wayne versions of most classic stories like that predominantly do not focus on the flaws of the male characters and hold them up to a pedestal of like, look at these prolific men in the West. Whereas the Coen Brothers version is like, so
these guys
Jeff
suck.
Bridges is kind of an alcoholic, kind of not great, but he ends up great at the end. So
well, ends up great at a specific like a narrow set of skills, right? I mean,
yeah.
in a way, and here's the difference too. It does, here's an example of a phrase that's been, a special set of skills, right? Think of that, like the movie. Take for example, the movie Taken, where he says that I've got skills. I kill people well. And even though even in that movie, there's other male protagonists, there are other male characters that are like laughed at, who are like doing things that are a lot better for real life. So here's a guy who's good at hunting people down. He's good at killing people. He's good at being tough and rough and everything. As the story goes on, you find out that he spent just as much time as a criminal as he did as a lawman. That lawman just seems to be a better deal now. That he basically switched because he almost was caught robbing banks and stuff. And that he's got a huge, reckless drinking, not just a drinking problem, but I'm going to get drunk while I'm following a bunch of people want to kill me because, so there you could say, oh, he's just that good. Or you could say, oh, no, this is a guy who is like alcohol dependent and has said fuck it with his life at the point where it's like, I don't care, his obviously he's probably, he's got all kinds of health problems, he's joint problems. So in the end, that's where, but I think it makes a better story, right? Because it's like, oh, here's this guy who is kind of, and in the whole, if you look, and that's why I think the ending is very interesting to me, because the ending jumps ahead. And where was he when he died? Right? He's working in like Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, because he is an archaic, like individual who only could exist for these specific years in American history in the way that he did anyway, right? And so is this, but it goes to this like complex sort of adventure story, complex in some ways and yet straightforward adventure story through the eyes of this young girl who is doing deals and making decisions in a world that does not welcome her, right? And in fact is like, you go home, not just you go home, but we're gonna, if you don't go home, we can kill you. Of course, that's the two options. There's no other option. But don't roll up a newspaper to stuff your hat so it'll stay on your head and take a gun and go after the guy who killed your father, right?
Right. Yeah. And also like, allowing for Haley Steinfeld's character to, talk down about the flaws of the male characters. Like that she kind of like, puts a mirror in front of a lot of their faces, is like, hey, your behavior is kind of bad, my dude,
Yeah, exactly. And doesn't really, and like she has this sort of realistic element of, yet she is tough and strong, but she's still just a little kid. And you can see to where in those moments, it's like she's not up to the task of every single thing along this journey, but yet her spirit, right, is like, well, we're doing this, so we're going to do this, right? I don't know how to do it, but we're going to do it,
Right.
And just a really great depiction. And so I can't, in good conscience, say a better adaptation, because I can only say that I'm 90% plus sure that it must be a better adaptation than the John Wayne one, as far as in the spirit of the book, So, so that was. I thought very interesting. You tell me where we're going. I want to mention my favorite one, but I have one that's coming out soon that I wanted to recommend to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
So you tell
let's
me where we're
see.
going.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, there's definitely some other adaptations I was gonna say
Do
that,
it. Yeah.
yeah. So
I
for
didn't know where you wanted me
me,
to sprinkle them in, so you
oh no,
take it.
no, I love hearing yours. So you did great. It's awesome. Yeah. So I was just gonna say that, like, Phantom of the Opera was in general something I wanted to talk about. So I got that out of my system, my neurodivergent system. Like,
Love it.
it's yeah, verbal vomit. But the other one that I love talking about is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or the Strange
Oh,
Case,
yes.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So this is also another neurodivergent special interest for me. Um, Again, monster transformations is the thing I've always been interested in, especially when it's studying the psychological nature of men in particular. Something I find really fascinating. And I feel like this story in particular is probably like the most iconic to do
Mm-hmm.
that. So, I grew up predominantly with the musical.
This is the man one woman loves, and the monster one woman fears. This is the musical that grabs Broadway by the throat. This is Jekyll and Hyde. His days were spent in the pursuit of science. His nights were another story. A story that will break your heart and make your blood run cold.
That came out in the 90s, of that. Have you ever seen the musical?
I've heard some of the music from it a little bit, and I've read a little bit about it, but I've never seen the whole musical.
Oh, so another fun thing to add to your list just for the lulls.
Definitely.
Highly recommend watching the pro shot that stars one David Hasselhoff as our
What?
There's such a fine line between a good man and a bad. David Hasselhoff on Broadway in Jekyll and Hyde.
This is no day at the beach.
Yeah.
This is he was in the musical?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay.
fun side note tangent just about musical adaptations about things, especially in the 90s. A lot of the time Broadway would do something called stunt casting, which they still do, where they bring a popular star of TV and film to play something because the show's not doing that great financially. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or Jekyll and Hyde, was notorious for that.
I didn't know that musical was that old.
Yes, from the 90s, 1997.
Wow.
The thing that I loved about that show is that they would bring some really interesting people, because the guy that wrote the musical, Frank Wildhorn, side note, he worked on a lot of pop rock artists. Predominantly, he worked with Whitney Houston. So he had a lot of connections, and that was just kind of like his comfort zone, as he liked working with pop rock people. So Sebastian Bach, the 80s singer, was in it at one point, which is a hoot.
What?
Yeah. I'll look up the list of everybody else. I'll put it in the show notes or something, but there's some other ones that are wild. But the David Hasselhoff one is what I grew up with, because I don't think I actually saw it on Broadway because I was a little too young, because it was one of those shows that was considered sexy and a little dangerous for the children.
Okay.
Yeah, very scandalous. So the musical I loved because not only did it go into the psyche of what the character is going throughout these different points in his life, but it also really dives into the two duality relationships he has within the show and in the story, which is with our sexy lady of the night, Lucy, who's desperately trying to live a better life and escape the dark city streets of London to become a better person. And his other girlfriend, who I'm forgetting her name. And in this one, like, you actually get to have multiple songs where the female characters are doing their I wants, like, I want this relationship, I want this for my life, blah, 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 blah. And I think that really adds to the complexity of this story about these two women who represent the two sides of this man, right? And how they also explore the internal, I guess you could say, psychological nature of how those two halves make relationships and how they connect with women.
Interesting.
Yeah, because especially when it comes to the the Hyde side of Jekyll and Hyde. Him, he treats women like garbage. Spoiler.
Right. It's a
yeah,
all in.
Right, really bad. But
I'd rather meet a bear out hiking than I would Mr. Hyde. That's what I would
agreed.
say.
Well, but then again, it's like the question of but which version of Mr. Hyde? Because there's ones that are like actually kind of sexy, and then there's ones that are like, yeah, I'd much rather meet the bear. Looking at you, Van Helsing version. Oh, that one's so gross because he eats like a cigar. It's really nasty. Yeah, really gross. But yeah, anyway, so I love that the musical and other versions that I love explored that, the way that this character in his dual sides views love and sexuality is so interesting to me. Hence why the version also I was going to talk about that's a movie is Mary Reilly.
In the house of Dr. Henry Jekyll.
Good morning, sir.
There lived a chambermaid named Mary Reilly.
I feel safe here is all.
I have decided to take on an assistant. His name is Mr. Edward Hyde, and I intend to give him the run of the house.
Did you see his face? He came out of the dark like he was made of it.
It's from the 90s.
Okay.
And it stars Julia Roberts as the title character.
Really? Okay. I am not familiar with this.
Yeah, so it is all from the perspective, the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from her perspective. As a maid in his house. So this version, the reason why I wanted to bring it up, that I think it's super interesting, is that not only does it explore that exact thing I just said about his female relationships, and what makes that story so interesting is how he deals with women. That, it's talking about masculine ideals and pressures and things that then are, he then throws onto his female relationships. Framing him. And I feel like this movie is like the perfect example of that, because Mary sees both the Jekyll and the Hyde side of him, and because she herself is actually like a very complicated character. Short version, she was abused by her dad, so she's very isolated and introverted because she doesn't know how to trust people, and so she ends up having like this ideal of Jekyll as being like the pinnacle, lovely doctor fantasy man. By the way, Jekyll and Hyde are played by John Malkovich. Should have said that also.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Right. So he is very much like the quiet, soft boy on this side.
Quiet, soft, intriguing, scary, might kill you. That all fits
on this side
with Malkovich. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, John Malkovich plays both of these versions like to perfection, even though this movie is kind of a hot mess, but he does a great job. So but then when she sees Jekyll is the personification of this sexual aspect of herself that she's both repressed by, like she's both disgusted by within herself, and also represses and wishes that she could act out with Jekyll.
I see. So there's something in Hyde that's accessible to something that, well, that's very fascinating when you mention it. Like there's because even just the kind of like dividing those kinds of things, and that goes to a whole kind of, which is probably what Stevenson was going for in a way, right? Is that whole obsession, that societal kind of rule making that we place on this of like, well, this is okay and prim and proper. This is also something we all want, but it's dirty. So we have to put it over here and call it dirty and pretend it doesn't exist. And we certainly, and which then becomes problematic if you're going to, how do you have a full human experience with another, with a partner particularly, if, oh, well, I love you, so I would never bring this into here, but this is right.
And but then the moment that you can no longer suppress that part that you were like forcing in, especially as a man, right, you then release it in a very toxic, destructive way, especially towards your female counterparts or
and luckily there's no analog for that in the real world.
Or like forcing such an aspect of yourself in there that when it finally comes out, of course it's going to kill women. Of course it's going to, ruin your life. And then there becomes a point where both sides of you are, being held in. And that ultimately is what happens to this character, is that Dr. Jekyll and Hyde cannot repress both of them, and they can't find the balance between the both of their lives either. That therefore he just kills them, or they both kill themselves in the act of trying to find that balance. And I think that is why I'm so gravitated to the story, because of especially how in certain adaptations, like I said, in Mary Riley, in the musical, but also I didn't get to mention my other favorite, the 1932 version with Frederick March, which is like also, by the way, the first movie to ever win an Oscar that was a horror movie, in case people don't know.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Yeah, like and so anyway, so I love that version as well, because that version also talks about these two relationships that he has with both the prim and proper lady when he's Jekyll, and the sexual lady of the night kind of character when he's Hyde. But the reason why he has that relationship with that other woman is because when he is Jekyll, he meets her and he's like, oh my God, like I wanna sleep with this lady so bad. There's a scene where she dangles her leg, and in 1932, that was way too hot for the pre-Hays Code Hollywood, because they were like, oh no, she's dangling her leg with a garter belt. Oh no.
Women didn't even have legs back then.
Yeah, God forbid. They didn't have legs. Anyway, but he keeps like thinking about it, and that's what makes him take the potion, because he's like, I wish I could have this sexual intense relationship with this sexy lady, but instead I'm like, oh no, I gotta repress that, gotta hide that. So what am I gonna do? Turn into a crazy ugly, because he's another one of the Hyde versions. I'd be like, oh no, I'd rather pick the bear every time. Oh no. Because he is ugly. But yeah, he takes the potion because he's like, I wish I could live out this fantasy of having this intense sexual relationship with this woman, and instead it's manifests into a really, really gross guy. So, but yeah, like I said, there's so many adaptations that I personally feel like deserve their moment to shine. But is there any other ones that you wanted to mention?
Let me mention. I want to share my favorite one right before I say that, though. Can I want to interview the other day for my podcast.
Ooh, exciting!
Yeah, with a I'm just going to his name, with Shyam Majaraju, who is the director and writer of a movie that's coming out now, 55, just the number 55. That's the name of the movie. You'll be able to see it on all streamers and everything, I think, coming out. It's already on VOD, I think, the video on demand. I think it's coming out through Hulu. He had said that in the interview. I wasn't 100% sure. It's having a limited theatrical release anyway. But it's really interesting because it was not billed as this, but as I was watching it, I was like, is this Oliver Twist? And then when I interviewed him, I was like, he's like, this is a very Dickensian story. And I was like, I wanted to ask you about that. So what it is, though, it is a story of a pickpocket in Mumbai, sort of modern day. It's this young kid, and he's got this number 55 tattooed on his arm. And he's probably 17, 18, something like that. But and there's all these other kids around him who all have similar numbers tattooed on their arm. So they don't have names, actually. That's a thing of the story. But all of them are in this elaborate pickpocket gang. And there's there's a guy, like a Fagin, if you will, a couple other adults around, who are forcing them. But it's not presented in a way that you recognize it as an adaptation right off the bat, because it starts out it's very much about this kid. And one of the things that this kid does is that when he steals from people, he's got this it's just what he does. It's like this or starve. Basically, these children have been sold to this guy for money. He buys these kids, and then he gives them a number, and then they do things for him, and then he brutalizes them if they don't do what he says, and then shames them for not being more grateful that he gives them money and food, right? That kind of thing. So, but when he steals from people, he'll keep their ID cards when he passes over the wallet and everything. And then he goes to their homes and he just kind of watches them. And he just the story kind of gets activated when he takes a particular interest in, there was a big score and this guy and the father who lost the money ends up takes his own life, and so now there's this daughter and her little sister that are making it on their own, and so he takes an interest in trying to help them because he has this guilt, but at the same time that's how he survives. And it kind of goes all through, but it's very, very Dickensian in its nature, so much that if right, kind of like the formula of a Dickens story kind of comes up, even though it's not billed as that and you don't notice it. But setting it in modern day poverty in India, in the city of Mumbai in particular, was very, very interesting to see how you don't even question it like, oh, this is a whole different world. It's like, no, this is the world we live in now. It's a different world socioeconomically than the one I live in, but I know it exists. And so anyway, very interesting and just visually very beautiful, very beautifully shot.
That's so cool.
So, yeah, so everybody watch out for that 55. It's pretty cool.
So
it's worth
is
a
that
watch.
I know you said it's going to be streaming everywhere. Is there like a particular like studio that?
Yeah, it is an indie movie. Let me see if it's directed and written by Shaman Madraju, and it's produced by. Looks like it's pretty independently made. I'm not finding the production studio name. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. I apologize. I don't have it.
That's so cool.
I'm sorry. I'm Scott Free, Ridley Scott's production company. And I knew that there was something in the back of my head. He's actually going to be doing some other things with Ridley Scott, and so it's Scott Free is the American production company. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you. I just wanted to say that.
No, that's okay. That's awesome. And I, shout out to Ridley Scott. Love him too. But yeah, I was going to say that is a great example of what I mean, that like adaptation shouldn't be paint by numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You can recontextualize them into different, cultures and scenarios and still give them a new life. But what was the other adaptation you were going to talk about? Your favorite?
So I'll say this was probably my favorite example when we're talking about these things, unless I think of another one some other time. But this one comes up again and again as my favorite example of what we're talking about with clever adaptations, which is the personal history of David Copperfield.
Whether I turn out to be the hero of my own story, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these moments must show. My boyhood days seem now like a scarcely believable fiction.
London is full of wonders and wickedness. And it's ours, David, to go wherever we choose. Well, I'm not down there. Creditors make that road impossible. 2 tailors and a most unreasonable muffin man.
From 2019, starring, going back to the project that we're trying to greenlight, starring Dev Patel in the titular role of David Copperfield, the Dickens story. And for anybody who hasn't seen this is a wonderful modern adaptation that uses a couple of very clever devices to do it. They tell the story as if you were both watching it, just like you're watching a movie of a story happen, watching a stage play of it, and reading a book or watching somebody write a book about it. All those things are happening at the same time throughout this thing.
That's so cool.
And so, yeah, it's just one of my favorites. I mean, anything with Dev Patel automatically, is better than something that doesn't have him probably. But one of the things, and it's got great, I mean, you've got Tilda Swinton, you've got Peter Capaldi, you've got, Hugh, not Hugh Grant, but Hugh Laurie. So you've got
the UK's finest.
all the people that are in everything British. You've got Ruby Bental from Lark Rise to Candleford. Even she's in there. Anyway, so just a little deep cut for everybody.
Nice.
Lots of people in this. One of the things that I really do like about this, speaking of modern adaptation, is that they bring in like ways of shooting things that are very meta. They bring in like lots of different like comedic aspects of acting and things that you don't see in some of the older ones. But one of the things is that it allows it and to bring in just a complete diversity of casting. The casting is diverse with no apologies and no explanations. Nobody ever says, "Why is this guy Indian?" Nobody ever says that in the movie. They don't have to have a one little thing to say, "Oh, he's adopted," or something. Nobody ever says anything. He's just there. And, "Oh, this is my family." Great. Some of my family's white, some's black, some, are people of color. It's just, everybody's just in there. It's like, there's a kid whose mom is of a different race. Nobody says anything about it. It just is. And it's a great example for me to say, if we didn't worry so much about that when we were doing casting, what kind of story can we tell, and what kind of a powerhouse of a cast can we put together? And so I know that's just one of the facets of it that I think is very exciting about it and very interesting about it. Is it's an example of what can happen if you totally take racial blinders off when you're casting.
Well, and I think, to our, discussion of Dev Patel and him being like the best ever. I think what I took away from that adaptation, even though I actually haven't seen it, but I saw the trailer several times. I wanted to see it. It's on my list. It's on my list. It just haven't gotten around to it. But I was so interested with that choice because it's kind of a really interesting contextual reflection of, England's history with India. And how obviously not at this point in history, but later on, India and England would have a very complicated relationship. We'll just put it that way. So, to have a very iconic and famous British character or English, UK, whatever way you want to say it, character brought to life by a actor who comes from a culture that was colonized by England is a bold choice.
Especially when it isn't, and not to say that a lot of times when you do reimagine things, you address things that are, like when we watch Anne with an E, there's a character with, they explore a character who comes to live in Avonlea, a family who are Caribbean and who are black. And so how does that work in this world, right? So that's a whole new, they did it on purpose. They embraced it. They looked at, we're doing this in order to explore something that wasn't in the books, just because it didn't come up. And so that's a thing that they can do too. In this case, it's not. It's just, he's just David Copperfield, right? And I think that's in a way very powerful to the point you're making, which is just like, yeah, we're going to cast him. And you know what? There's no exploration beyond just, he's a great guy, a great actor playing David Copperfield, which is really cool to see. And that's a decision. It reminded me just now, I was just thinking of Tramiel Tillman in Severance. If anybody out there is watching Severance, plays Milchick in Severance. And in the second season of Severance, they sort of start touching on some of the racial issues of that world and that universe a little bit. And I heard him on the Severance, the podcast that Adam Scott and Ben Stiller do, and they were talking to him about his character, and he said one of the very first questions he had after reading the script was, he asked Ben Stiller, so does my character know he's black? And he's like, in this world, do I know that I'm black? In other words, do I walk around and is that an issue like it is in our world that we inhabit in real life, right? And how much does that factor into his identity in a comparison with other people that he's sort of interacting with? Because it wasn't really clear what the racial makeup of that world was, right? And so as they developed that was a question that he just talked about. And so I think when you are doing inclusion and diversification, particularly in adaptation, I think that is something you have to decide. Do we decide that, yes, this is something that's going to alter the storyline and we're going to address that? Or we just, no, it doesn't. It's just this guy, this person is playing this person.
Right.
And I think making that decision, I feel like there was a decision made with this one. And so to me, making the decision is probably at least as important as which decision you make. Does that make sense? The fact that you did make one.
Right. Well, it kind of goes back to some other conversations we were having before the podcast started, where you make a casting decision that is both reflective of modern times, but even without it necessarily being the point of said casting, it makes you then contextually wonder, like, with that choice, like what it's going to then do to the story to just change it, just even without changing a word, just having that be a thing that exists within it. Because, going back to Phantom of the Opera for 2 seconds, I saw a version, I mean, it's not a version because it's the musical, but one time I got to see it cast with an actor who I love named Norm Lewis, who's black, as the Phantom. And that one, there's like no movie adaptations where the Phantom is black, like none. But just with having him being played by a black man adds a whole other context to the show without changing a word.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, and that's what, and I've often, this is where, because I haven't heard lots of people, and maybe just nobody watched it, maybe that's why, but the personal history of David Copperfield, I feel like it got some play. It was around.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone complain about the racially diverse casting. I kind of wonder if one of the reasons for that is that and this is where I believe they made a choice. I've never read anything about it. I've never seen it come up in any interviews. I think they made a choice because I think by casting it, but first by casting, by having so much diversification of ethnicity in the cast, it wasn't like, why is he playing that? It was more like, well, everybody's playing. What are you talking about? It's a true example of the best. The thing that people like to say, should we go to the best person? Usually, when people say that with that tone of voice, they mean the white person. But technically, giving it to the best person is a good thing, and the best person for the role. But I kind of wonder also if the device that they used of making it kind of like a play, and you have some sort of fantastical imagery once in a while that kicks in where, oh, we're in this place, but then all of a sudden it turns into words on a page, or somebody reaches through this thing because it's a little model all of a sudden. Is this a stage play? Is this isn't presented as you have to watch it to see. It's very expertly done. But I kind of wonder if that device helps a little.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like it's kind of like and I feel like you'll agree with this to some extent. I feel like usually you and me do on these things, but I feel like inherently like everything in art is political, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
sure.
Yeah, that like it's kind of in that notion of like even if there's no intention behind this choice you've made, there are going to be things that change just because you made this choice.
Yeah. Particularly particularly for those that consume, in the case of media and art that you put out there like that, any piece of culture that's consumed by people who are not have of the same world experience of the person who made it are going to have a different take of like, wow, did you not know that? Ooh, I didn't happen to run it by anybody who did know that. And
right.
All of a sudden, so yeah. But it's not always how it seems to pan out.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't. But I just want to say, Dwight, we have talked about some really cool adaptations, and I love this conversation so much. So I just wanted to know before we end our episode, anyway, is there any additional things you want to say about adaptations in general? Any other ones you're excited for?
Yeah, let's see. I think I got just about everything out there that I remember. But and I'm one of these that, and people tease me about this too, because I actually don't mind adaptations, reboots, redos, things like that. I don't mind them as a concept. I want to be clear that individually, some of them suck, just like any projects or books or movies or anything can. But when I see, I think when we give lots of people lots of chances to take a whack at it and see how it goes, oftentimes that's where something good comes out, right? And then sometimes that will also lead, and you should never forget about the fact that there might be somebody out there who gets access to tell a story only because it's tied to something that is bigger than them, or that is a adaptation, a readaptation, a reboot, and for some reason they're like, here's this lousy thing that you can get to make, and then they use that to get to make something truly, different next time or whatever too. Yeah. So I don't know, when stuff comes out, I just kind of try to look at it on its own merits and say, if something, this is like going back to our fascination with the Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Avonlea saga. I don't like Anne with any more than the original miniseries, but I do like it as much because I gave it a chance and watched it. And so the thing is, to me, those are both two fairly different tellings of the same story, which was a book that I also read when I was young, and that is a different telling of the story. It's maybe the first one, if you will, but they all have some pretty cool aspects in them that the others maybe don't have. And so, if you can treat it as just a different version of a thing, and then see what you like about it, don't like about it. That's my mentality anyway.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Actually, just to go a little bit on a side tangent, I meant to say, I love Interview with the Vampire. Like, it's one of my favorite stories of all time. And right now, the TV series that's being made, even though, that's a great example of like a casting of like a colorblind casting, that completely changes the story of Louis, you know, being now portrayed by a black actor and also changing like the time in which the story exists. That is, I think, such a great change to that story and has been so well handled by everyone involved and doesn't like, you know, change the character in a really negative way. And I feel like that's the effort that I want in all adaptations. And that's why I think adaptations are important because they can talk about aspects of our history that we need to reflect on, you know, also talk about, you know, things and new parameters when it comes to gender roles and race and all these other things. And that's why like all this stuff is important. And I wish more people would give them a chance rather than being like, it's not exactly like the book that came out 200 years ago. Why is it exactly the same thing all over again? But yeah, no, like I said, I could talk about adaptations of literature and classic literature forever. And I'm just so happy that I get to talk about it with you because you have such a great insight about all these things.
Well, I'm happy to anytime for sure.
Yes, it's so good. So Dwight, tell the folks podcast wise what you're doing. What's coming up in Dwight's world?
Let's see. My podcast is The Broken Brain, and I am do a weekly look into psychology and culture and kind of the intersection between psychology and culture mainly in my other life outside of podcasting. I'm a therapist. I've been working in mental health and trauma recovery for years and years and years. And so that's a lot of what we talk about. But we do things where we'll come on and look at the way that those things are used and utilized in the storytelling, like what you and I do when we talk about Anne, and talked about earlier that I'd interviewed an indie filmmaker and things, but I also talk to people who are working clinicians and researchers in the field talking about psychological forms of treatment. We talk about addiction, recovery, and trauma. And so, just all kinds of things like that are going on. You can find The Broken Brain anywhere where you find podcasts. You can go to my website, which is dwighthurst.com. And if you listen to every month we highlight a different charity or a nonprofit and tie that in with some of the bonus materials we do for some of our patrons and things. We have a lot of fun. This month is September when we're recording this. I don't know when it's coming out, but whether it does or not, you can still find it. September, every year on the podcast, I celebrate Batman because that's September is when the commemoration of Batman come out. So every year I do some episodes focused on some of the Batman stories and comics and the movies and things. Because Batman draws very heavily from a certain viewpoint of mental health in the Rogues Gallery, and I'm doing a series of little short videos that I do every year about diagnosing Batman villains as well to say, you know, here's what they say they are in the comics and how much does that really look like real life and mental health. So it's a lot of fun.
That's so awesome. And I'm just saying, if you wanted to talk about Batman with somebody, I'd be happy to talk about that with you too.
Very nice. Okay. We've got some scheduling to do then.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, Dwight, as always. And thank you so much for being awesome. And hopefully we'll get you on the podcast again soon.
Awesome. Anytime. Thanks, Ayla.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the episode. If you want to follow more of the adventures of It's Really a Podcast, you can follow It's Really a Podcast as one word on Instagram, or you can follow my crazy pastel adventures at It's Really Day-lin on Instagram, Threads, and various other social media platforms. You can also email the show at itsreallydaylin@gmail.com. I also want to give a special shout out to Break Studios from Pixbay.com for their awesome upbeat pop intro theme. And also shout out to Vincent from Pixabay for this cute ending track. Until next time, like I said, stay really you because that's the best thing you can do. See you next time.